Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional from the world of human resources from Trinidad and Tobago, Joanne Cook-Walcott. Joanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ashtosh. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for doing the work that you guys have been doing.
Thank you so much. Joanne is the Managing Director and Principal Consultant of Persolve Limited. So, Joanne, my first question to you, can you tell me a little bit about your own journey into the world of human resources and what drew you to this field?
So, Ash, if I have to be completely honest, I would say that I kind of fell into human resources by accident. So there are two strands to this story. So the first strand is that from my earliest recollection as a child, the game that I would go to when I played was to play school, right? I always wanted to be a school teacher, which should not have, surprised my parents because my mother was a school teacher. But what was different about that is my mother actively disencouraged any of her children to become a teacher. And you know how that can happen sometimes. So, I laid that dream aside, but fast forward a couple of years later, I was in my university studies, my first year of college. And during the vacation, as most college students do, I was actually afforded an internship with an organization. And I mean, up until that time, I had zero clue what I would like to do up until then. And as fate would have it, or maybe not so much fate, but just, the worlds coming together in the way they were meant to, I was placed in the human resources department. And not only was I placed in the human resources department, I was placed with a trainer.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was just my everything just shifted in a way where I really felt in my soul, there's no other way to explain it. I really felt that this was what I was called to do. At the time, of course, I didn't realize it was a calling. It just, at the time, it was just an understanding that this was something that I could do. This was something that I think I would enjoy doing. And so that started the love affair for me with human resources management. And after that, in the years subsequent to that, in terms of my schooling, I continued to pursue any program that I could do on human resources management. And then, of course, directly after, in my internships and in my working, I continued to pursue HR related studies.
Wonderful.
But I actually didn't start in an HR department. Would you believe that my very first job after leaving school was to be a teacher?
Wow.
So the fact that I'm a trainer now, the fact that my lead specialty is development, I think it harks back to that early childhood stirrings that I had to teach, to develop the group.
Fantastic. So let's talk now about Persolve Limited.
Sure.
What are some of the common HR challenges that you help clients address in your consultancy?
So that's an interesting question for me, only because, I started off my career as an HR generalist, and I've spent perhaps the first 20 years of my career generally, giving HR services. So I am quite comfortable providing HR services in all areas. But when I started my consulting practice, I knew that I wanted to carve out a specific niche for myself, because I have to admit that I'm in an enviable position in that I could choose the activities that I engage in. And so for me, what drives me, what gives me joy, what is my passion, always comes back to development. And so I have centered my practice and my consulting services around development in two different ways: developing HR capability So I really enjoy working with other HR practitioners, either mentoring and coaching or developing their own capability. And I also really enjoy seeing leaders grow from whichever point they're at, whether it is a future leader or a current leader who needs to take it to another level, or really just honing the leadership skills that a person has. So most of my services are centered around development, talent development, and the services in respect of, my business also is in terms of managing the organization growth. And that's why transformation and change is central to what I do.
Fascinating. Thank you. And how do you tailor your services, your consulting services, to meet the specific needs of public versus private sector organizations?
So, the thing about it is, Ash, people are people, huh? So the needs are not so different. What is different is where people are, where the organization is in its trajectory. And so when I look at my experience in dealing with public as well as family-owned business and private businesses, it really has to do with, hand-holding the organization from where they are. And where they are could be at different ends of that spectrum. So in my own experience, I have found publicly traded companies to be a little further along in terms of acquiring new technologies, certainly investing more and more in their human resource capital. But family-owned businesses, for instance, at least the experience that I have had in Trinidad, and when I talk to my colleagues, it's fairly similar. There's a reluctance to invest deeply in HR. And that's not necessarily unique, I imagine, but there's also a very deliberate sense of resource management. So you're spending what the family sees as their wealth. And there's always a reluctance to part ways with more than what they're convinced they need to part ways with.
Right.
And so the hand-holding is different. The hand-holding for a publicly traded company is really all about a very professional way of guiding the organization along the path that it's already on. Whereas for the family business, it has to do more so with building trust, showing the value and the benefits of taking certain actions. And it takes a little bit longer, I think, in that modality of the family-run organization than it does in a publicly traded organization and a private organization.
Great response. And Joanne, could you've specialized in talent and organizational development and transformation. Tell me a little bit more about the specialization.
So talent management really is our current construct of how we interface with work and workers in its simplest forms. And I mean, I'm old enough, Ash, to be honest with you, to have come through the evolution of HR, where we started off in personnel management. I know you might find that hard to believe, but I was in my very earliest career seeing that movement from personnel to human resource management, where there was a fuller understanding that the human resource was a factor that ought to be used in its fullest sense and brought into the organization and managed in a particular way, to where we are now in terms of talent management, which is looking at how do we curate the experience for our employees so that in that managed, deliberate, strategic experience that they have by way of shaping a culture, by way of shaping their experience, they are able to optimize their services. So that's the talent management aspect. But what you find is that in so doing, invariably, you are marrying the course of the human resources experience with the course of the organization. And so in tandem with managing that HR talent management evolution, you have to also deliberately strategize around the organizational experience. And so, organizational transformation really looks at what are some of those special interventions that I need to put in place, and how do I manage that in a way where, even though it's a change for the organization and it may even disrupt some of the things that we're doing, it's going to bring about greater returns in the long run. So how do I manage that experience and that journey in a way that is not entirely disruptive to the organization and that serves the organization in a better way?
Well said. Can you also talk to me a little bit about your views on female leaders and the
Oh my.
progress you have seen in this area since you started?
Wow. Yeah. So Ash, as I've just alluded, to be honest with you, the first half of my career, I was the only female leader
Mhm.
in the management meetings that I would have attended, and I would have led my functional area in HR
Mm,
as the lead
mm.
in a male-dominated environment.
Right.
And my own experience is that I think, to be honest with you, it really did shape who I am today, because I remember being very well supported by the men around me. And
Mm,
that may be slightly unique in some case. But for me, I was truly supported by the men around me. I
mm,
think my experience shifted mid to late career. And perhaps the reason behind that is because that's, of course, when, as a mother, my children were at a stage where they needed me more, and
mm,
I had to be more involved in their care and so on. And so I did struggle coming out of that very confident and very assertive style that I had as a female leader, and supported
mm,
by my male colleagues. And so, it was only in the last 6 years that I have kind of um, come together with a better understanding of female leadership and the
mm,
power of female
mm,
leadership. And so, of course, in our understanding of diversity and involving a truly diverse set of ideas in our organizations, I've come to really understand perhaps why I was not as supported in my
mm.
leadership in my latter
Right.
years. And so I have, I don't know if you realized it, but I have actually curated some female leadership programming. I do on an annual basis a program on female leadership. And so I invite professionals and leaders, women professional leaders, to truly understand why we lead differently.
Okay.
And that's not so hard. That's actually not as hard as you think.
Mm,
What is hard is breaking down the social barriers
absolutely.
that exist in the minds of female leaders. It is really the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome that sometimes haunts us.
Mm,
And of course, there's some organizational, structural issues that we talk through, and we, try to understand how we can work with or around that. But from in my experience,
mm.
the issues has to do more so with our socialization,
Correct.
as well as the supporting framework that women may need because of our nurturing and caregiving responsibilities
Absolutely.
in our leadership.
In fact, my next question, you partly answered it, is the
Oh,
program that you have developed for female leaders. But I also wanted to know from you that in this program, how do you mentor and develop female leaders differently, if at all, from their male counterparts?
so, I guess there's credibility in my own mentoring and coaching with female leaders. The
Mm,
reason why, of course, is credibility is because my own journey as a female leader, so
mm,
that I very often share my experiences. I very often can understand, even if the experience that that person is having is very different to mine, but I
mm,
can understand as a female leader
mm,
what that experience is doing to that person and how they can emerge from it as a stronger leader and be able to take ownership of their own journey and emerge from it, maybe not as scarred as perhaps some persons without that support and without that development. So that for me, I think the credibility that I bring to that experience, to that mentorship, and in truth, most of my coaching are with female professionals. Not that it's chosen to be that way, but I think women respond, I think, to my own leadership qualities and my own ability to develop others. And they very often request of me assistance and support in their leadership.
Very well said. So changing gears slightly, I want to also talk to you about technology. And
Sure.
I've been seeing and speaking to many HR leaders like yourself on how technology is changing human resources. And a few minutes back, you spoke about personnel managers. I wanted to
Yes.
tell you that I'm older, and I remember that even before personnel manager was payroll management.
Oh, yes,
And
yes.
then it became, they say now CHRO is the key member of the C-suite. So I'd love to get your perspective, Joanne, on how is technology changing human resources?
Yes. So, and I guess we're at a place in our lives where, looking back, we could actually see that evolution, Ash. And what is emerging now is the impact, the very real impact technology has on transforming our processes, on transforming how we engage. And HR is not shielded from that, and thankfully so, because AI, right, has the power to utterly transform the human resources experience that we have. So we are honestly encouraging more HR persons to understand that technology. In fact, there's some programming that's to come in the HUMAT, Human Resource Management professional organization that I belong to, because we are seeing the nexus between being more effective and the technology as an enabler. And so the emergence of AI is a real opportunity for HR practitioners and leaders to understand that there is value in taking care of the routine, mundane tasks using the technology. All right. And so I am sold that AI has a place in HR to enable us to offer solutions to the routine questions that we often have to stop and answer and engage others around, where we can use our HR minds to focus on greater problems. So there's there's AI, but there's also the use of analytics. And thankfully, I think more and more HR professionals and leaders are understanding the value of data and how we can use data to make more informed talent decisions. So that when I ask the question, who is best able to lead this project? Yes, I can have those nuanced conversations around the table with leaders and so on, but I must also be able to curate that information from a well-honed database that I've collected with true rich data on my people. And so, the human capability is such that we are not going to be able to quickly amalgamate that information in a way that quickly coughs up the right information. There are people we may forget. There are, things that we mightn't consider. And so analytics has a really huge place in helping us make more informed and better talent decisions. And then, of course, everybody understands the value of hybrid environments. More and more, we are encouraging our organizations. Some have more traction than others in, providing that level of flexibility where it's possible. I mean, there's some roles that are difficult to move into a hybrid kind of model, but certainly where it is possible, there's so much more value in the experience for the human resource personnel and for people and people who are busy and balancing their myriad of responsibilities. in terms of embracing the technology behind remote work.
Mm.
So, I mean, technology is definitely here to stay. It's
Yeah.
enabling organizations to do wonderful things, but it's also enabling HR to be more, I think, focused on the experience and really answering some of the bigger questions that are haunting organizations instead of getting into the, form filling and data crunching
Yeah.
aspects that we were perhaps known for.
Well said. Well said. So I have time for two more questions for you, Joanne. My
Okay.
next question is related to culture.
Oh,
And, it's a very important aspect of any organization. And yet, I
yeah.
think it's one of the most misunderstood terms
Yes.
across the world.
Yeah.
I'd love to get your perspective on how would you assess and improve the culture in an organization?
Wow. So, I mean, culture is, I think it's what's beating leadership even as we speak, right? I don't know
Mm.
that we will ever really get everything right in terms of managing culture, but certainly there's more we can do in terms of understanding culture. So, um, as I say to my students all the time, in the Caribbean, we have our own way of doing things. We have a
Right.
culture that we're known for. And
Mm.
out of that, Trinidad and Tobago has its own unique cultural style of doing things, which is very different from Jamaica, very different from Barbados, very different from St. Kitts and the other Caribbean entities.
Mm.
And then you would think inside of Trinidad and Tobago, each organization has developed its own unique cultural constructs. And so it's so important for us as HR leaders to understand those influences that impact how we work, what we think are important, and what drives our needs
Mm.
as people. And so if you don't understand that in terms of the wider construct of us as Caribbean people, if you are doing HR in the Caribbean, then you're going to find yourself in great difficulty in engaging,
Mm.
in leading, and in motivating your staff.
Mm.
But quite apart from that understanding in terms of the general culture around our Caribbean mindset, we also have to deliberately curate a culture in our organization
Mm.
that is going to lead to success. And I firmly believe that you have to ingrain certain values in your organization, really just for competitive advantage.
Right.
There are very few organizations that exist in a monopolistic kind of way.
Mm.
All of us are facing competition somewhere, somehow. And so, what is going to be very different is the way we do things. The
Right.
technology might be the same, the
Mm.
practices might be the same, but
Mm.
when we bring that added flavor in our true Caribbeanness,
Mm.
and when we understand that as leaders, then we are able to bring a competitive advantage that is unique to our organization, unique to our culture, that serves our human resources in a way that allows them to be freely expressive and truly produce in an optimal way. And the truth is, Ash, I think leaders are the architects. I mean, HR has a place in terms of the design and kind of leading and championing the way forward for culture.
Mm.
But it is the leadership team that has to, come together and truly model those behaviors and agree that these are important values for us to promulgate in the teams that we serve,
Mm.
so that you can spread that kind of, and make it endemic into the organization and the teams that we have.
Well said. And Joanne, my last question, and I'm going to ask you to look at your crystal ball for human resources.
Oh my.
What trends do you see shaping the future of human resources in the next few years?
Gosh, Ash, it's not hard to see that the way we work is changing so rapidly. And of course, AI is upending things. And I think it's going to be more disruption in that way. I think our world has become so increasingly more volatile. and there's so many more unknowns that are impacting on us and our day-to-day experience. And so for me, I think there's going to be a unique challenge, not just for HR leaders, but for leaders all over, to notwithstanding all that level of disruption, to manage the experiences that people are going to have in a way where they can confidently optimize themselves and find expression and actualize in a meaningful way. And that's easy to say. I mean, that's a sentence in itself, but the way that has to be articulated, the way we work, for instance, is definitely going to change. I mean, there will perhaps continue to be units and widgets that we could count and so on, but I think rapidly automation and robotics is going to replace that. So the human experience of what we understand to be work, the value that we bring to the table, I think is going to change. And I think it is something that HR leaders and practitioners need to really understand, that that's where it's going. So all of these jobs that we have at this point in time, over time, is going to change. What is a job? Is going to change.
Correct.
What is work? How we interact with work. I think it's fundamentally going to change. And who knows what the human experience is going to be like at that point. But I think that's what we have to ready ourselves for.
Very well.
And actually, I think we might see the cusp of it in our lifetime.
Correct. Joanne, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me. What an amazing conversation you and I have had, from your desire to be a teacher, to be a top human resource leader, to now consulting in the world of human resources. Thank you for speaking to me on so many different aspects of HR. We spoke about technology, we spoke about culture, we spoke about the future, and so many more things. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much, Ash, and all the best to you and to your readers and viewership. Just wishing everyone the best. Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.